There is more BS printed about solar panels and how they work and how to wire them up and how to make them efficient, written on the internet, than probably any other subject, certainly that I've ever seen. So this video is about, from somebody who has been working on the ground with solar panels for over 30 years, when they work, what you're actually buying, what you're getting for your money, and when mounting them on a vehicle or any platform, boat, doesn't matter, any platform that is regularly moving, where to mount them on the vehicle, if at all. I'm Andrew St Pierre White. Join me as I share my passion for building four-wheel drive trucks and then travelling to the remotest parts of the world. Okay, first thing, when mounting it on a vehicle, where do you mount it? And as you can see now, I've got a panel on my roof. Cool, eh? 90 watt. That is the claimed wattage of the manufacturer. I'll get more to that later. 90 watt. But when I arrived last night, there was a wind blowing. And so I faced the vehicle into the wind so I would have a more comfortable night. But as you can see, rises in the east, I'm pointing more I'm getting nothing. In fact, let's have a look to see how much current I'm actually getting. 0.1 of an amp. How much do you think I would get if the vehicle was pointed towards the sun? Considerably more. So now I have to move the car. Well, and that's the problem. I don't feel like moving the car. Here is that same panel that I have on the roof of my car. And if I plug it into my extension, let's see how much current I get if I add it. 0.6 of an amp. Can we improve that? Oh yes. What do you think now? 3.1 amp. Light striking a photovoltaic cell obliquely is very inefficient because of refraction. Light not being absorbed but bouncing off it. And you can see it's an enormous difference between it angled correctly and not angled correctly. Anamorphous panels generally are a little better at oblique light, lower light levels than other panels. These are not amorphous panels. So what's the solution? Well, at the moment, you have to have a stiff panel that you can tilt and point towards the sun. But I don't want to carry that in the car all the time. It's a pain. I could slide it in and have it removable. Now that's a better idea. It's a better idea to have that panel removable than nailed down. If I was camped here, staying here for a while, and dependent upon the current that the panel is producing, I would have to move the vehicle. And to get maximum efficiency, I would have to move it at least twice, if not 3 times, during the day. So maybe the solution is a solar blanket. Now, that's a 90 watt panel. That's a 90 watt panel. This is a 190 watt solar blanket. I decided that if I'm going to carry a solar blanket, I might as well carry a big one. So let's have a look and see how this one does. All right, in real life. Okay, I'm going to unplug this one and I'm going to plug in the Red Arc solar blanket. Well, there's a problem already. So you can see that problem. The problem is that it's flat. Well, let's have a look and see what current we're getting out of it anyway. Not even 1.2 amp, it's the same problem. You have to be able to move them around to get them into the optimum position for the sun. Which means, well, it's not as easy as it might seem. So, we need to tilt this to our sun. Now, good solar blankets have got eyes on them, like this. This one's got a nice batch of eyes, and can you see the problem? Don't do what I just did. Buy yourself a solar blanket and then don't actually figure out how you're going to actually mount it. Have things hung on the vehicle. I'd like a nice sit down now, but I can't because I'm charging my batteries. But now, with it pointed in the right direction, and of course, whatever you do, you have to make it easy to move, because like you would have to move the vehicle 3 to 4 times a day, you would want to move the blanket 3 or 4, 5 or 6 times a day to get the maximum amount of current back into your battery. 3.7 or so amps from a 190 watt panel. I was getting about the same, slightly less, from a 90 watt semi-rigid panel. So here's the thing. Solar blankets, and this is a general rule, because of the fact that they are indestructible and flexible and extremely compact, they are not as efficient in lower light levels than rigid panels. Solid, rigid framed panels that one puts on one's house are far more efficient than both of these types. But when we're traveling, we need something that's robust. Those panels are not robust. They're not designed to move. I actually had one fitted to my first troop carrier. It was a 180 watt high voltage anamorphous panel, and that thing used to pump current. It was absolutely magnificent, but it suffered exactly the same problems as the one that I've got on now, which is reasonably efficient, but it's attached to a 3-ton truck that I have to move every time the sun decides to move, which is quite often. Let's have a look at some realism here. That is a 190 watt panel, and in the book it tells me that the maximum power current it can deliver is 11.6 amps. The 11.6 amps measurement is the actual tested maximum for that panel, but the wattage isn't. The wattage is a theoretical wattage. In other words, if this panel was lying on the surface of the sun and there was no voltage drop in the cable going all the way to Earth, then it would, in theory, produce 190 watts. So if I calculate what 190 watts is in terms of actual amps, it should be able to produce 15.8 amps. But it says in the book it can only produce 11.6 amps. That's because it's made of material that reflects the sun. There's voltage drop in the circuitry in the thing as it gets warmer, so the voltage drop increases because there's more resistance in the cable. You've got other cables going to the car, and every time there's a connection there's a voltage drop. And so the theoretical maximum, if you've got your setup really good, like I've got in here, a proper solar charger, a PowerPoint tracker charger, not a regulator. Okay, more about that later. A PowerPoint tracker will look after the battery and it will look after the panel, which you can see now has now fallen down. Okay, so with all of that in mind, this panel will produce 11.6 amps on an extremely bright day, which is a nice healthy amount of current. For my purposes, ample. Those two panels there, the one that'll work the best when the sun is at its highest and brightest, no question the solar blanket will work better because it has a higher output rating. So in low light, anamorphous and rigid panels are better. In maximum light, solar blankets are better because you can move them around. So when you're considering buying panels, it's not really any point in looking at the wattage, because the wattage is a theoretical. With a high quality, expensive panel, the wattage is going to be closer to the actual than for very inexpensive panels. So if you see, oh, look, a 250 watt panel for $300, wow! The 230 watts is a theoretical. It's got nothing to do with what they actually produce, because what you're buying is not wattage, say what it says on the box, but it's how much wattage is delivered to the battery. I see it time and time again. Somebody will come to me and say, whoa, check what I got. I got a 230 watt panel and I paid $250 for it. Wow, isn't that amazing? And I think, that's not amazing. You've been misled, folks. So how do you know? How do you know if you're getting good or bad? Do you know there's no real way to tell? You go to a good brand. Just go to a good brand and pay money. A brief word about cables and extensions for solar power. I have seen many times solar experts that will come into your home and say, well, it's only going to produce 10 amps. You don't need a thick cable. They're wrong. They're absolutely fundamentally wrong, because, and I'm sure there's a scientific reason for it, and I don't know what that reason is, but photovoltaic cells are incredibly sensitive to voltage drop. Remarkably so. So this panel here cannot deliver more than 11 or so amps, and yet I've got a cable that I made up this myself, and of course Anderson plugs or similar, big, heavy, chunky cables. Andersons are great, but they're not good for permanent outside installations because they're not waterproof and they do corrode. But for our applications, where things are generally kept clean and dry, they're absolutely fine and ideal because they can carry a good current. That cable I have there could easily handle 60 to 80 amp over the 4 meter length. It makes an enormous difference. And it's a strange thing, and I haven't found anywhere where it can be explained. But for example, go into your store where they sell the Red Arc blankets and go and have a look at the Red Arc cables. They're thicker than this because they know, they understand that voltage drop on cables is significant in the loss, in the combined losses that happen when connecting photovoltaic cells. So to summarize, if you're going to fit a panel to your vehicle and you want to make it a permanent installation on your vehicle, make them as big as you possibly can, and do not angle them. Actually have them flat, because you'll get the most of the arc of the sun. Now typically with this angle pointing in the wrong direction, I won't get any sun until probably noon. You have to compensate for the fact that it's not going to be well positioned most of the time. Just one up there for my vehicle is not nearly enough. But the one on the ground there, either one of those is, because I can move it around. Okay, secondly, if you're going to use extension cables and everything for your solar panels, make them big, fat and chunky, and don't skimp on the size of the cable, and use really good, solid, high amperage connectors. And lastly, this solar panel cheap is so costly. it is so obvious. If you've got a small budget, buy a high quality small panel. Do not think you're getting more current out of a cheaper nasty just because it says a big figure wattage on the box. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you for watching.